Hi everyone and welcome to this video where we're going to discuss how we can cut down our word count when it gets too high. It's definitely one of the main concerns that my students have when they've finished writing their essays or reports. How do they get what they want to say down to the required word count limit? Now, word counts in themselves aren't a bad thing. It's a way of creating a level playing field and giving students a goal to aim for in terms of the desired length, but they can be very challenging if you have a lot of knowledge and you want to demonstrate that, but you find yourself constrained. Here are some considerations that you should take into account when you're thinking about your word count. Firstly, always be mindful of that limit. Check it before you start writing. It'll give you an idea of the expected length, and it will also give you an understanding of the level of depth that you're going to be able to go into throughout the assignment. There's no point getting to part 2 of 5, for example, and having already reached the limit. That tells you that in those 2 sections you've already done, you've probably gone way over the expected level of depth or content in those sections. So setting out with the goal in mind is helpful. Check whether your university or school gives you any leeway on the word count. Often you can go under by 10% of the total word count or over by 10%, which can be really helpful. Also check whether references are included in the word count. Sometimes the reference list is excluded, but the in-text references count, and other times the in-text references are also excluded. So check that first. Title page, if you need one, check whether the words on that title page are included. Same thing with the contents page, same thing with any tables. Sometimes you'll find that tables full of numerical data are not counted, whereas tables full of qualitative data or words will count. Appendices, if you attach them at the end, if you take some content out and put it into an appendix, will that count in your word count or not? Also, check whether quotes count. Sometimes direct quotes that are fairly lengthy don't count if you put them in italics and in inverted commas and separate them from your main text. Other times they do. And finally, if you've been given a template to use, sometimes that template comes preloaded with a certain number of words. Check whether those words count in the word count, or whether the word count that you've been given only applies to the words you put into the template. Okay. I've got 5 tips in this video. Ways that I use, or methods I use, ways that I can get to a lower word count. And the first one is to look at the spaces in your word count. Now, this isn't relevant if you're hand counting your words, if you've written something out by hand and then you're counting it by hand as well. But if you've got a hand in a document electronically and the word count on your document will give your marker, teacher or lecturer or tutor, the number of words that you've got in the document, then there are some little tricks you can use with Microsoft Word in terms of spaces, which will actually remove spaces and also count as one less word in the word count. So just make sure you don't have any extra spaces floating around between words, not necessarily between punctuation. But for example, in this particular one, example on the screen, it is around punctuation in terms of the colon there. If you have the space after the word list and the space after the word colon, that counts as one word more than if you say this is a list colon space and then you place your list there. The other thing you can do to remove spaces is to hyphenate words. So for example, the word cost effective, you could say something is cost effective with 2 words. If you hyphenate that into cost effective, which is acceptable, then that is 1 word instead of 2. Now, I know these might seem like very small gains, but let's say you do that 20 times across the course of an essay and you are looking to cut down 200 words. You've made 10% of your savings straight away. So definitely consider these. These are easy wins. You don't even have to change the words that you've used. You've just got to look for spaces. Now, tip number 2 relates to acronyms, another easy win. The first time you use a term, you should use it in full, and then in brackets, put the acronym that you might be going to use to refer to that full title. And then after that, you can use the acronym by itself. If you don't space the letters out, then that will count as 1 word every time you use an acronym. So for example, on the screen there, I've said cognitive behavioural therapy. In brackets, I've then said CBT, and that would be 4 words. Cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT, is one form of therapy. Client X should find a reputable CBT specialist. Now, the second time there, I've just used the acronym CBT, and I've used 1 word instead of using 3. And that saving is going to come up every time we refer to CBT within that paragraph. So find and replace in Microsoft Word is your friend if you decide to do this. You can go through, look at each time you've used the term and replace all the ones that you choose without having to scan or read the document yourself. So that's 2 easy wins. I'm adding complexity to each of these strategies as we go. So tip number 3 is a little bit more complicated. You really do need to apply some thought here, but that is to search out repetition and delete unnecessary sections. Sometimes we might say something in one way, and then to demonstrate our knowledge, we might then say it another way in the next sentence. And when we do that in our normal conversation, it's often a good communication tool because it helps the person that we're talking to understand what we're saying. I know as a teacher, I will often explain things in more than one way. But when you've got a tight word count, what you're wanting to do is try to be as succinct as possible. Explain something clearly the first time. Don't restate things. So the example I've put on the screen, most employees enter the firm straight from university as graduates. This means they are inexperienced because they have not worked in a professional workplace before entering the firm. I would take out the words straight from university because the term graduate means a person has just come from university. So we really have some repetition in that first sentence. In the second sentence, this means they are inexperienced. We don't need to then say because they've not worked in a professional workplace because we've already said in the previous sentence that they're coming straight from university. So you can cut out quite a lot of repetition in those 2 sentences and still have the same message coming across. Most employees enter the firm as graduates. This means they're inexperienced. You could cut that down even further. Most employees enter the firm as graduates and are therefore inexperienced or something like that. But at the moment, we're just focusing on repetition. And so with repetition, you're just looking for things that you might say more than once. Tip number 4 is sentence structure. And this is going to go over a couple of slides because there is potential for big savings in your word count with this strategy. So the first idea with sentence structure is that you can move from passive to active voice. That will depend on the style of your writing because some formats require a more passive sentence structure where you're not referring to the subject who's carrying out an action, and that's intentional. For example, with a science report, you often aren't referring to the experimenter, you're using third person there in a passive voice. And sometimes formal writing will require that as well. But if you're not doing those types of writing, then you can change your sentence structure to be more active, and that will often cut down some words. For example, down the bottom of the screen there, a paper was submitted to the board by the consultants. It sounds nice and formal, 10 words. The same meaning can be conveyed with 2 words less using an active voice. The consultants submitted a paper to the board. And again, like I said earlier in this presentation, these might seem like small wins, but if you can combine them across a whole document, you're going to find that you're saving several words every paragraph, and that will eventually add up. Another sentence structure tip is to use shared predicates or the beginning of a sentence. So you can link 2 endings to the same beginning or combine sentences together to help reduce the number of words you have to make sense with each sentence. So ways you can do that, you might firstly use a conjunction. That's the first tip on the screen here. So for 15 words, I've got 2 sentences. The team made excellent choices across the carnival. The team took home the championship trophy. I can add the conjunction and then I don't have to refer to the team because I have the team at the beginning of the sentence. So now I can say 2 things the team did within one sentence. The team made excellent choices across the carnival and took home the championship trophy. The other thing I can do is use the beginning sentence as my dominant clause that carries the meaning of the sentence, And then I can have that second part as a subordinate clause, as long as it links to the same predicate or the same subject or whatever it might be at the beginning of the first sentence. So for example, the team made excellent choices across the carnival, taking home the championship trophy. So that cuts us down from 15 words to 14 words to 13 words. And there are often big wins in doing this kind of thing. You can also cut down some words by using pronouns once you've first mentioned a subject. For example, Mrs. Jones is 2 words. Once you've introduced Mrs. Jones in a paragraph, you can refer to her as she, unless you introduce another female, and then you do have to clarify again which one you're talking about. But the same thing with my parents becoming they, or the firm becoming it. You can then cut out one word every time you refer to them. And finally, tip number 5 is around document structure. Now, this is the hardest type of change because it generally requires big, time-consuming changes where you really stop and think about the content that you're putting in your document and the best structure for it. So you can change whole sections and reorder them depending on the template that you've been given, but reorder them to help build upon one another so that you don't have to restate something because you might have just explained it in the previous section, for example. And then within paragraphs, you can also change the paragraph structures around to create a better meaning so that you don't have to restate things more than once. So that order does make a difference because if you put things in the right order in terms of the content, then you might not have to re-explain something to make another point related to it later down. So don't be too scared to do that after your first draft is complete. So as an example here, it's tricky to explain this, but in most essays you might have your introduction to the topic, your main ideas and your thesis at the beginning, then idea number 1, which refers back to the thesis at the end, idea number 2, which sort of stands alone but does refer to the thesis, but then idea number 3, which refers to the thesis, but it also uses some content that you explained in idea 1, but because you've got idea 2 in the middle, you have to quickly summarize that content again in order to make idea number 3 nice and clear when you introduce it. If you had idea number 3 and you moved it into the second place after idea number 1, you could then use some linking words such as building upon this idea number 1. You then don't have to restate it all at all because you've just explained it, and then idea number 3 would flow naturally and become idea number 2, and then idea number 2 would become your third idea before your conclusion. So just stopping to think, if you find yourself saying the same sort of thing in more than one place in an essay or in a report, stop and think about whether that is because the order is possibly not very efficient, and maybe it would be better to put 2 sections which are fairly closely linked together, and then you might be able to take out a whole paragraph of explanation and just say further to the paragraph above or further to the section above or whatever it might be. And that way you might be able to cut out a whole paragraph or a whole explanation at a time, which is big word count savings there. So let's put it all together. This paragraph has 225 words. Now, I don't really want to think about the structure of the paragraph in terms of its how good it is. It just came from a student who was working on an assignment. I've changed a few of the words around so that it's not exactly her work. And then I've put it here on the screen just as an example for you. So this paragraph is about pesticides and herbicides. Pesticides and herbicides are used to prevent weeds and pests from affecting small crop growth, but they can have negative impacts on the ecosystem. Herbicides are chemicals that destroy or stop the growth of weeds, and they are used in over 90% of farms. Some will kill all plants and others are selective. The ones that kill all plants are used in the soil. And then there's the reference. Pesticides are used to control insects and pests. Overall, crop protection products increase the productivity of land, control invasive and non-invasive species, and contribute 73% of the total value of crop production in Australia, $20.6 billion. Reference. Because they are used so much, they lead to a lot of pollution, especially micropollutants in water. Insects and birds that come into contact with pesticides can be killed. Reference. Chemical-based herbicides and pesticides can be dangerous to humans as well as the environment. Herbicides can reduce the risk of erosion and improve soil content, but overuse can make weeds resistant to them. Biopesticides are an alternative that use natural chemicals, minerals and microbes and can be very selective. Reference: herbicides and pesticides are important to small crop farming, but they can do damage to the ecosystem and need to be used less often. I'm just going to flip to the next screen where you can see that I've cut that down by 25 words using some strategies. So back to sentence 1 with the bright green there. Pesticides and herbicides are used to prevent weeds and pests from affecting small crop growth, but they can have negative impacts on the ecosystem. So I've changed that word structure, that sentence structure to be, but they can negatively impact ecosystems. So we went from 4 words to 3 words. The second sentence, herbicides are chemicals that destroy or stop the growth of weeds, and they are used in over 90% of farms. Chemical herbicides destroy or stop the growth of weeds, and they are used in over 90% of farms. So we've gone down to 2 words from 4 words. The purple section here, some will kill all plants and others are selective. The ones that kill all plants are used in the soil. Change that to some used in the soil will kill all plants while others are selective. That should have a comma up between plants and while. But you get the idea there. It's a little bit less clear, but the meaning is still there and the sentence structure helps keep the sentence much shorter. Let's go down to due to widespread usage. Previously it said because they are used so much. Due to widespread usage is shorter and also sounds a little bit more technical and sophisticated as well. So sometimes doing this can force you to think about your sentence structure and improve it. Now the red word there, encounter. Insects and birds that encounter pesticides can be killed, whereas the original said insects and birds that come into contact with. So we've found one precise word, which means the same thing as those 4 words and cuts that word count down by 3 words. This turquoise one down here, as well as, changed it to and. Easy. Down here, this olive one, resistance in weeds. That was a replacement for make weeds resistant to them. And finally, that forest green at the bottom, they can do damage to the ecosystem and need to be used less often. Can damage ecosystems and their use needs to be limited. So you can see there that by changing lots of sentence structures, using some conjunctions, we've been able to bring that word count down by 25 words in one paragraph. I also took out the word overall in that final version, which you can see at the end of line 4. We don't need to say overall. We can just start with that sentence with the word crop protection. So that's another word that can come out as well. So sometimes there are unnecessary words like that too. Once we've done this over the whole document, you'll find that if you can save 20 to 25 words per paragraph, 5 paragraphs and you've got 100 words off. And very quickly you can cut that down and hopefully bring a few hundred words off your word count and get yourself down to the goal that you have. I hope that was helpful. I was joking with my husband that I'm sort of giving away the tricks of my trade here, but on the other hand, my goal is to help people, help my students to help themselves as much as possible as well. A good teacher makes themselves unnecessary, superfluous, and that's what I'm trying to do here. So if you found the video helpful, please like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel as well. Email me if you have any feedback or any topics that you'd like a video about, jane@lavenderlearning.com.au, and don't forget to hit the notifications bell on this channel so you can see when new videos come up, and then you can decide whether they might be helpful for your stage of learning as well. Thank you. Bye.